In looking ahead to Denis Villeneuve's Dune Messiah, there's a lot that can go wrong with adapting that story because of how different it is to the previous book. But I think it also presents a great opportunity to make something unique and end the new film trilogy in a way that no other trilogy has. I personally think that Messiah is one of the best Dune books ever written, and I believe that Herbert's work was ahead of its time. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing why I personally believe that Dune Messiah can be a game changer for modern cinema, discussing its impact, and why it's a story that Dune fans didn't expect in book form, and probably won't expect in film form either. This video will contain a few spoilers from the Dune Messiah book, so if you don't want anything spoiled, then I would recommend watching this video at a later time. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my content surrounding Dune Messiah and beyond, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating and subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's dive into the reasons why Dune Messiah was ahead of its time. So Frank Herbert's Dune Messiah is often regarded as a book that is ahead of its time, especially in its examination of themes such as the perils associated with messianic figures, the ramifications of power, and the intricacies of human behaviour. Having read the sequel book multiple times, I for one have an odd relationship with it. On the first read, it was almost too much of an alteration for me to enjoy it as much as that first book, and I found myself wanting more from it, even though I loved some of the story beats and the central themes at play. But after rereading the book, I had quite a different experience, and I found that I couldn't stop thinking about the ideas it presented. I had an even greater appreciation for the deeper themes and complex characters on show, and it gripped me in a way that nothing else has in a long time. The first Dune was one of the most influential science fiction books in history, often held as the best-selling novel in the genre and considered as one of the greatest books of all time, whereas Messiah didn't really receive that same level of love. Publishers claimed that readers preferred stories of heroic triumphs rather than a protagonist facing internal struggles and isolation. The narrative investigates the repercussions of Paul Atreides' decisions and the unforeseen outcomes that follow it, presenting a cautionary narrative about the weight of prophecy and the possibility that even the most well-meaning leaders may inadvertently generate more issues than they resolve. It illustrates how Paul's prophetic visions propel him into actions that culminate in a catastrophic galactic jihad. The narrative delves into the corrupting nature of power and the difficulties of balancing leadership with accountability. And despite his good intentions, Paul becomes overwhelmed by his position as the Emperor, resulting in significant suffering for many. The story takes us on a journey that is shaped by the culmination of thousands of years of human history, and a decade or more after the events of Dune, Paul Atreides has now seized control of Arrakis and established his empire. To some of the Fremen, he's the long-awaited Messiah who was destined to lead them, while to others, he did more harm than good. And to the envious houses and feudal factions, he is seen as an imposter. It appears that the influential figures in the known universe are plotting to overthrow him, and this is because, in order to protect his empire and maintain control over spice production, Paul's war has extended to the far reaches of space. Billions have now died, and the fighting shows no signs of stopping. So while Dune depicted the rise of an empire, Messiah explores its downfall in very unexpected ways. It essentially examines the intricacies of human nature, shedding light on the imperfections and constraints that even remarkable individuals face. It addresses the weight of prophecy, illustrating how predetermined destinies can serve as both a beacon of hope and a potential snare. To many, the narrative can be seen as a critique of social and political systems, tackling issues such as colonialism, power disparities, and the perils of unquestioning loyalty. It presents a rich array of characters, each wrestling with their own desires and convictions, especially in that of Paul, who endures significant psychological conflict as he confronts his fate and the repercussions of his own decisions. It prompts the audience to reflect on the possible repercussions of choices and the constraints faced by even the most influential figures. To me, it serves as a warning about the perils of unquestioning belief and the intricacies of human behaviour, ensuring its relevance and impact on viewers even in today's times. As director Denis Villeneuve has said in many interviews during the release of his Dune films, Messiah was written in reaction to the fact that people perceived Paul Atreides as a hero, which is not what author Frank Herbert wanted to do. So Denis' adaptation is to get closer to the idea that it's actually a warning. When Dune Messiah came out, it was not what Dune fans expected following the success of the first book. It was a very different kind of book that took everything that was presented before and critiqued it on a character level and even a storytelling and structural one. And I think what we've seen in Villeneuve's 2 Dune films has definitely kept that in mind with the changes he's made. The director has altered the narrative to cast a doubt on Paul Atreides' rapid ascent to immense power by the conclusion of the first story. Zendaya's portrayal of Chani deviates from her role as a devoted Fremen partner, as she ultimately rides off into the sunset on a massive sandworm, leaving her lover behind. This change hints that Villeneuve may take the story in an even bolder direction in the sequel, and some have even suggested that he might position Chani as the leader of the Resistance against Paul's overwhelming rule. In my opinion, that would be too much of a change, and if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I think he's actually going to go in a slightly different route with her, having Chani be in one of the Fremen camps of ex-fighters, which relates to quite a pivotal scene in the first act of the Messiah book. But not to mention some of the other changes he's made, like with the north and the south of the Fremen, and even Paul's sister Aaliyah being presented in a very different way. In Dune, we fought alongside Paul Atreides and the Fremen, battling for justice, navigating the complexities and political intrigues of an incredibly intricate universe. And as we saw at the end of part 2, that perspective started to shift as we began to see what was happening through the lens of a character's eyes like Chani. As we learn in the Messiah storyline, we find Paul fighting to preserve his empire, and we as readers are challenged in our perspectives of him as a heroic figure. How do we navigate the thin line between right and wrong, and how do we react to the process of guiding humanity towards a prosperous future amidst enduring generations of struggle? Dune concluded with a victory, but the aftermath is far from simple, and Messiah demonstrates that endings aren't always neatly tied up because they are too complex to be that. It's a conclusion to Paul Atreides' story that only Frank Herbert could have imagined. And now, with Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of this book, he has the opportunity to conclude what could be a grand trilogy with a unique take on the traditional approach to sci-fi or fantasy endings. It feels like Villeneuve has kept Messiah in the back of his mind all this time, and in order to deliver on the central messages of that book, which Frank Herbert was all about building towards, he has made key changes for that to work. Frank Herbert's Messiah diverged significantly from the expectations of many Dune enthusiasts at the time, and I believe the film adaptation will also surprise viewers. Unlike the sub-adventurous tone of the other books, this installment is essentially a tragedy. While Dune follows a classic hero's journey, Messiah delves into philosophical themes, exploring the weight of leadership and the essence of prophecy. So in my opinion, Messiah was as good as Dune, but in a totally different way. It presents a more dramatic perspective on the universe, and Herbert aims to achieve something unique with it. Paul's every decision led to an escalating debt that he ultimately had to settle 12 years later. The original novel subtly indicated that this was not a conventional hero's journey, suggesting that Paul's fate was not that of a traditional saviour. In Messiah, these ominous hints come to fruition, and while some readers may be put off by that shift in tone, it is essential to Paul's narrative, and Herbert evidently intended that from the outset. This leads me to delve deeper into the distinctive viewpoint presented in Messiah and what makes it particularly noteworthy. The book has a tighter focus and carries a somber tone as it details the devastating consequences of the jihad and Paul's decline. The entire series explores the theme of power's corruption, and without Messiah, readers might easily misinterpret the ending of the first book. Herbert chose to depict the jihad as something that has already happened, with the Fremen's rampage across the galaxy resulting in the destruction of countless worlds. Dune Messiah serves as a crucial counterpoint to the conclusion of Dune, as it details the consequences of achieving ultimate power. This decision was both bold and insightful on Herbert's part, because although Paul achieved victory in the short term, the very outcome he dreaded came to pass. The jihad transformed him into one of the most notorious figures in human history up until that time, with Paul even comparing himself to Hitler in the novel's pages. It's important to remember that when Paul first arrived on Arrakis, he had never killed anyone before. He then killed Jamis, which had a big effect on him. But then the jihad carried out in his name resulted in the deaths of billions, leaving Paul to become understandably a bit unhinged. Messiah is frequently viewed as a more intricate and reflective follow-up to the original Dune, as while Dune captivated audiences with its grand world-building, political machinations, and thrilling escapades, the sequel explores more profound themes such as power, ethics, and the repercussions of leadership. Some readers perceive it as slower and more thoughtful, in contrast to the brisk action of Dune. Additionally, the sequel confronts the more sinister aspects of power and the ramifications of messianic figures, which may provoke a deep thought for some, yet fail to connect with others. But while Messiah might not resonate with as wide as an audience as its predecessor, I believe it delves more profoundly into the core themes and characters. So in saying this, its quality ultimately hinges on personal taste concerning narrative style and thematic richness. For me, it was a thought-provoking read that emphasises the repercussions of actions rather than the actions themselves. It highlights the consequences of events that occur off stage, prompting readers to consider the cost of following a messiah and whether the journey is truly worthwhile. It was my favourite of Herbert's Dune books, and not just because it was different, but because its unique approach felt right to the central story and themes of Herbert's universe. And I believe that he delivered on those while posing new questions for the books that followed it. It was an answer to the first Dune's many questions, and I think it opens the door for a very unique conclusion to Denis Villeneuve's trilogy on the big screen. So in thinking about Messiah as quite the standout book, what do I think this means for the project as a film? Well, I think we're going to see a heavy character-driven film that focuses more on the dialogue and performances between characters than it does the sci-fi elements we've seen in the previous two. Now, that's not to say that Dune Messiah is not going to have show-stopping visuals and moments of action, because I think Denis has already stated that the film will be heightened in that sense too, and he will add moments to make it feel larger. But that also doesn't mean that Denis is going to remove the identity of Messiah as a book, because like I've talked about before, it has a very unique sensibility. For me, it's going to be more a drama and a tragedy than the first two were, and when it comes to the award season and honouring the craft and storytelling behind Dune, I think Messiah will benefit from that massively. Sure, Dune Part 2 should have won a lot more awards than it did, and it's one of the very best sequels and sci-fi films that I've ever seen. But Messiah has a lot more potential to be an awards darling if Denis focuses on what makes that story tick. What made the first Dune film so interesting was Denis' focus on all the detail behind all of the flashier elements of a sci-fi film. The story of Messiah takes that to another level, and you find that moments with characters, story themes, and even singular locations used are explored in a lot more depth. And that's because Messiah focuses on going deeper into less. And like I said before, it's more of a character study than it is an epic adventure. Now, by no means am I labelling the first two Dune films as that, but they do have a lot more elements of an adventure film within the general arc of the story. Messiah spends a lot of time in the city of Arrakis in single locations with Paul as he grapples with his own legacy and the future based on the decisions that have been made. It's very introspective, and it sets up a film that can be very deep and very intriguing as a trilogy closer. Essentially, a more character-focused film that feels a bit like what we got with Part 1, but more conclusive and dramatic in the scenes we do get. And in comparison to other trilogy closers like Return of the King, Return of the Jedi, or even The Dark Knight Rises, it's less important as an epic, and more important as a film grappling with massive themes. That's where Messiah can carve out its own legacy and become a very unique conclusion, one that we haven't quite seen before. But that was my video discussing why Dune Messiah was ahead of its time and why I think it can make for a groundbreaking final film in Denis Villeneuve's trilogy. With more twisting story beats and a lot of character work to explore, Messiah can work as an unusual but also fitting ending to Denis Villeneuve's Dune trilogy. The director and his team constantly aim to raise the bar in sci-fi filmmaking, and while the Messiah story calls for less action than Part 2, it's a story that can provide some unique foundations of its own, and the director can alter a few things to enhance it on the big screen. He said in the past that he would only make it if the film could be better than what we got in Part 2, and that excites me because seeing a creative who is already at the top of their game aiming for bigger things means that if he stays true to that, he could give us a final film that is really special. The director has already overcome an extremely hard task of adapting the world of Arrakis and making that first book for modern audiences, so who's to say he can't do the same with a book as difficult as Herbert's Messiah? But let me know down below in the comment section what you're personally excited for surrounding Dune Messiah, alongside whether you are hopeful that the film could be a game-changing one come its release. For much more videos and news on Denis Villeneuve's Dune universe, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.